They all laughed when I helped a homeless man outside the restaurant. What they didn't realize was that this act of kindness would expose the truth about my brother. At 42, I thought I understood betrayal. Then my brother Christopher laughed as he declared that even street vendors had more dignity than me. Everyone at our family dinner joined his cruel chorus. I didn't argue. I simply walked away. 6 weeks later, he would beg for mercy. I never imagined my brother's true nature would reveal itself over something as simple as human compassion, but here we are. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I'm still processing the magnitude of what unfolded. Some context. I've always been the unconventional one in our family, primarily because I chose to forge my own path instead of joining Hamilton Industries, our family's luxury consulting firm. Christopher took over from our father, and he ensures everyone remembers his position of power at every gathering. The thing is, I've built something remarkable for myself. Remarkable enough that I'm typically the one covering expenses when we gather as a family. Last Tuesday was intended to be a celebration. Christopher had been boasting about securing some major contract with a Fortune 500 company, so I offered to host everyone at Meridian, this exclusive rooftop restaurant downtown where reservations require a 3-month wait. My mother Victoria was there, along with Christopher, his wife Anastasia, and their daughter Sophia. Sophia's 9, and probably the only authentic soul in our family besides myself. The evening began predictably enough. Christopher dominated every conversation with his characteristic self-importance, while Anastasia nodded along as if he were revealing the mysteries of the universe. I've mastered the art of tuning out their performance over the years, focusing instead on Sophia's animated stories about her advanced art classes and her latest sculpture project. It was when our entrees arrived that everything shifted. Through the restaurant's floor to ceiling windows, I noticed an elderly gentleman sitting on the marble steps of the adjacent building. He had a weathered messenger bag containing what appeared to be his entire world, and he was struggling to stay warm in the evening's unexpected chill. Having been blessed with the resources to help others, I discreetly signaled our server to prepare an additional meal, their signature salmon with seasonal vegetables, plus their acclaimed butternut squash soup, and requested it be packaged for takeaway. No one registered the quiet exchange with our server. Then Christopher's voice cut through the ambient conversation. Playing savior again, little brother? His smirk carried that familiar edge of superiority. I maintained my conversation with Sophia about her upcoming art exhibition, but Christopher couldn't resist escalating his performance. You know, he announced, his voice projected deliberately for nearby tables to overhear. It's fascinating how you constantly attempt to prove your moral superiority through these theatrical displays of charity. Is it because you're still trying to compensate for all those failed business ventures Dad had to rescue you from during your 20s? I kept my attention on Sophia, but she had grown quiet, watching the adults with that perceptive awareness children possess when they sense something fundamentally wrong. Anastasia was already giggling in anticipation of whatever Christopher would deliver next. The server returned with a packaged meal, and I excused myself to step outside. As I approached the elderly gentleman to offer him the dinner, Christopher's voice carried clearly through the restaurant's open terrace doors. Even street vendors have more dignity than you, he laughed, his voice booming with cruel satisfaction. At least they're honest about their station in life. You're just masquerading, pretending you're not the same disappointment you've always been. The elderly man had just expressed his heartfelt gratitude when the sound of laughter erupted from our table. My mother's nervous, high-pitched giggle, Anastasia's shrill cackle, and Christopher's booming laugh created a symphony that felt like it was drilling directly into my consciousness. Only Sophia remained silent, her small face pressed against the window, eyes wide with what looked like genuine distress. I returned to the table and completed my meal in absolute silence. Christopher continued his performance, weaving in calculated jabs about my charity cases and how I was attempting to purchase a personality. Each barb earned its expected laughter from his captive audience. I watched Sophia push her gourmet children's meal around her plate, her earlier enthusiasm completely extinguished. When the check arrived, I placed my platinum card on the leather portfolio without uttering a word. Christopher was mid-story about his latest business triumph when I stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Michael," Anastasia chirped, not even glancing up from her phone, where she was undoubtedly documenting the evening for her social media followers. I looked at each of them in turn, my mother avoiding direct eye contact, Christopher and Anastasia lost in their bubble of self-congratulation, and Sophia, who suddenly jumped up to embrace me tightly. I held her close for a long moment, then placed my card on the table. The meal is covered. I need to leave. That's all I said before walking toward the exit. Through the window, I could see Christopher rolling his eyes, probably launching into another commentary about my dramatic tendencies. What they don't understand is that I spent the following days making calls and investigating things I'd been willfully ignoring for far too long. I've supported Hamilton Industries more substantially than they realize, and perhaps it's time to examine exactly what my brother has been accomplishing with all that authority he's so proud of wielding. The elderly gentleman was still there when I departed. He'd carefully saved half his salmon, wrapping it meticulously in the restaurant's linen napkin for breakfast, he said with a dignity that Christopher could never comprehend. I handed him my business card, encouraged him to visit my office if he needed anything. Christopher believes worth is measured by how much you can extract from others. He's about to discover how profoundly wrong he is. 3 weeks have passed, and I need to share what I've uncovered. It's far worse than I initially suspected. These past weeks have been extraordinary. My phone has been constantly buzzing with increasingly desperate messages from various family members. I haven't responded to any of them, except for Sophia's texts about her art projects and school achievements. She shouldn't bear the consequences of the adult's dysfunction. The truly revealing developments began last Thursday when I received an email from Margaret, my father's longtime friend and the firm's external auditor. The subject line was direct. We need to discuss Hamilton Industries immediately. What followed was a 3-hour video conference that left me feeling genuinely cold. It turns out Christopher's celebrated major contracts weren't precisely what he'd been claiming. Margaret had noticed irregularities in the financial records, subtle at first, but becoming increasingly blatant over time. She'd attempted to address these concerns with my mother, but Victoria dismissed them with her standard "Christopher knows exactly what he's doing" response. I dedicated the next several days quietly examining records Margaret shared. The pattern was unmistakable. Christopher had been systematically embezzling funds from Hamilton Industries for years. Not modest amounts, either. We're discussing millions in fraudulent consulting fees paid to shell corporations that all trace back to personal accounts under his control. The devastating irony? Some of those accounts were funded by my own substantial investments in the family business. Every time Christopher needed capital injection for his supposed expansion initiatives, he came to me, and I consistently helped, believing I was preserving our father's legacy. Yesterday, Anastasia called. Not to apologize, naturally, but to inquire whether I'd be attending the board meeting scheduled for next week. Her voice carried that artificial sweetness she employs when she wants something significant. Christopher says it's merely a formality, but he really needs you there to authorize some important documents. Family must support each other, right? Her message was revealing in ways she didn't intend. What she doesn't know is that I've already spoken individually with each board member. Christopher has been feeding them contradictory versions of the company's financial status for months, each version carefully crafted to conceal his systematic mismanagement. But financial data doesn't lie, and these numbers tell an unambiguous story of deliberate theft and corporate fraud. The most disturbing discovery emerged when I cross-referenced transaction timestamps with specific dates. Remember that elderly gentleman outside Meridian? The exact same evening I bought him dinner, Christopher had transferred a substantial sum to an offshore account. A sum that precisely matched what was required to cover payroll for our father's most veteran employees. He's been gambling with people's livelihoods while publicly mocking others for demonstrating basic human decency. Victoria sent me a text this morning. Please, Michael, whatever you're planning, consider your brother's family. Think about Sophia. I am thinking about Sophia. I'm thinking about how her father has been systematically stealing her future while teaching her that cruelty is acceptable as long as you're laughing while inflicting it. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Christopher doesn't know that I've already submitted a comprehensive audit report spanning the past 5 years. He doesn't know that Margaret has been meticulously documenting everything for months. He doesn't know that his carefully constructed world of privilege and mockery is about to completely collapse. My phone just buzzed again. A text from Christopher. Hey little brother, we need you at headquarters tomorrow. Time to step up and become a real part of Hamilton Industries. What do you say? What do I say? Nothing yet. But I've prepared 4 separate folders of documentation. One for the board of directors, one for the federal authorities, one for the sick, and one for our mother, who will finally have to confront what her golden child has truly become. Some of you might wonder why I didn't confront Christopher directly at Meridian that evening. The truth is, I've been confronting him my entire life, just not in ways he could recognize or understand. Tomorrow, he'll finally comprehend exactly what kind of person he's been mocking all these years. The elderly gentleman from outside the restaurant came to my office last Monday. Turns out he used to work for my father decades ago, before Christopher forced him into early retirement using fabricated performance evaluations. The stories he shared about Christopher's early management style filled in the final pieces of this puzzle. I've arranged for a car service to collect Sophia from her private school tomorrow and take her to her favorite art studio for an extended session. She shouldn't have to witness what's coming. Sometimes protecting family means protecting them from other family members. The meeting convenes at 9 o'clock sharp. I'll share the outcome with you all afterward, but one thing is absolutely certain. Christopher is about to learn that karma doesn't always take the diplomatic approach. The board meeting concluded 2 hours ago. I'm sitting in my car in the Hamilton Industries parking garage, trying to process everything that transpired in the past 4 hours. Some of you requested immediate updates, so here's exactly what happened. I arrived early at 8:15. The conference room was empty except for Margaret, who was setting up the presentation equipment. She gave me a subtle nod. Everything was prepared. I placed my 4 folders on the mahogany table and waited. Christopher strutted in at 8:57, Anastasia trailing behind him as always. He actually smiled when he saw me, that same smug expression from Meridian. Finally decided to join the real family business, little brother. I didn't respond, just observed as the board members filed in, followed by our mother. Victoria looked genuinely nervous, her eyes darting between Christopher and me. She sensed something was seriously wrong, but couldn't identify what. Christopher began the meeting with his characteristic flourish, discussing growth projections and international expansion opportunities. I allowed him to continue for exactly 20 minutes. Let him excavate that hole deeper. Then I opened the first folder. Before we discuss expansion plans, I said, sliding copies to each board member, we should examine these financial transactions from the past 5 years. Christopher's expression didn't change, but his left eye developed that slight twitch he's had since childhood. Anastasia reached for her phone, probably to begin damage control. I had already ensured the conference room's signal was completely blocked. What's this regarding, Michael? Asked Dr. Harrison, our longest-serving board member, scanning the documents. It's about accountability, I replied, then turned to Christopher. Would you like to explain the consulting fees to Wellington Enterprises, or should I? The color drained from his face. Wellington Enterprises was his first shell company, named after his college roommate. Remarkably sloppy. This is absolutely ridiculous, Anastasia interjected. Christopher has grown this company exponentially. You're just bitter because. Because what? I interrupted. Because I chose my own path while your husband was systematically embezzling from employee retirement funds? That got everyone's complete attention. Victoria attempted to speak, but I was already opening the second folder. 5 years of systematic theft, I continued. Shell companies, fraudulent consultancy agreements, inflated contracts. But the retirement fund, Christopher, that's what makes this criminal. You don't understand. Christopher began, his voice trembling. The market was volatile. I needed to cover some temporary shortfalls. Temporary? I produced the bank statements. Is that why you purchased the yacht last month? To cover shortfalls. Anastasia's perfect composure cracked completely. What yacht? Turns out Christopher hadn't mentioned his recent acquisitions to his wife. The vacation estate in the Hamptons, the offshore investment accounts, the private gambling debts he'd been covering with company funds. The following 3 hours were a blur of accusations, denials, and shocking revelations. Christopher attempted every manipulation technique, deflection, emotional blackmail, even trying to implicate Margaret in some of the transactions. But I had documentation for everything. Every transfer, every fraudulent contract, every calculated lie. I did what was necessary. He finally exploded. Dad would have understood. He knew business isn't about playing nice. That's when Victoria finally found her voice. Your father, she said quietly, terminated his own brother for taking a single unauthorized commission. He would be absolutely ashamed. Christopher laughed then. That same cruel laugh from Meridian. Ashamed? He'd be ashamed of him. He pointed directly at me. The disappointment who abandoned the family business to play humanitarian. At least I stayed. At least I tried to preserve his legacy. By stealing from it, I asked, opening the fourth folder, the one containing the federal criminal complaint. The room fell silent. Christopher's face turned an interesting shade of gray. You wouldn't, he whispered. Remember what you said about street vendors having more dignity than me? I stood up. At least they're honest about who they are. The board voted to remove Christopher immediately. As majority shareholder, something he'd never bothered to verify, I had already prepared all necessary documentation. Anastasia left halfway through the voting process, her perfect mask completely shattered. Victoria stayed until the end, silent tears streaming down her face. When it concluded, she touched my arm gently. Michael, I don't know how. Just make sure Sophia is okay, I said. As I was leaving, Christopher made one final attempt. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. I turned back. Know what you are as a thief who happened to be born to the same parents as me. And now you're unemployed. I paused at the door. I hear Meridian is hiring servers. Try not to mock their charitable customers. The federal authorities are reviewing all evidence. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss complete restructuring. And I just received a call from Anastasia's attorney, but the most important message came from Sophia's art instructor. She won first place in the city-wide Young Artists competition. Her piece was titled Kindness. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it works exactly as it should. It's been 6 weeks since my last update, and I promised to share how everything concluded. Justice, as they say, is a dish best served methodically. Mine came with a side of absolute devastation. Let's begin with Christopher. Remember how he always boasted about his business acumen? The federal prosecutors didn't find it quite so impressive. They raided his Hampton estate last Tuesday. My evidence was merely the beginning. They discovered records of money laundering extending back 7 years. The most damning detail? He'd kept meticulous records of everything, probably believing he was too intelligent to ever face consequences. Anastasia filed for divorce 3 days after the board meeting. Not from moral outrage, mind you, but because I ensured she learned about Christopher's mistress in Monaco, the one he'd purchased a villa for using company funds. The same villa Anastasia believed was an investment property for their retirement. Her attorney contacted me for evidence to use in divorce proceedings. I provided everything, free of charge. The expression on Christopher's face when he realized his wife's legal team knew every detail of his financial crimes? Absolutely priceless. But I wasn't finished. Remember that elderly gentleman from outside Meridian? He wasn't just any former employee. He was my father's original business partner, the man who helped establish Hamilton Industries. Christopher had forced him into early retirement years ago using fabricated performance reviews and calculated character assassination. I've reinstated his full partnership with retroactive compensation and granted him a permanent seat on our board of directors. His first official act? Voting to approve a comprehensive audit of every decision Christopher made during his tenure as CEO. The retirement fund scandal made the business section of every major newspaper. Christopher's photograph was featured prominently being escorted from his estate in handcuffs. His former associates in high society, they vanished faster than his offshore accounts. Amazing how quickly people distance themselves when the facade crumbles completely. Victoria attempted to play peacemaker, begging me to consider dropping the federal charges. He's still your brother, she pleaded desperately. I showed her the surveillance footage of Christopher mocking elderly employees while simultaneously cutting their retirement benefits. She stopped defending him after witnessing that particular display. The company itself? I've restructured Hamilton Industries into an employee-owned corporation. Every long-term employee now holds equity shares. The expressions on their faces when they learned they'd become shareholders, not just workers, that's what authentic business leadership creates. Anastasia's social circle has completely disintegrated. Turns out people don't want to associate with someone who knew about retirement fund theft and remained silent. Her country club membership was revoked last week. Apparently, they maintain standards. Who knew? Christopher attempted to contact me through his attorney, offering to make things right if I would persuade prosecutors to reduce charges. I forwarded his message directly to the federal prosecutors as evidence of attempted witness tampering. He's now facing 22 years instead of 12. But the most satisfying karma arrived yesterday. Christopher had hidden substantial money in cryptocurrency accounts, believing he was being clever. What he didn't realize was that I'd been tracking those accounts since the investigation began. When he attempted to access them from Victoria's house, where he's been staying since the divorce, he discovered them completely empty. Every cryptocurrency unit had been transferred to an untouchable trust fund for Sophia. Speaking of Sophia, she's living with Anastasia's sister, now a genuinely decent woman who teaches at the private art academy. I've arranged for Sophia to attend the most prestigious art institute in the country. The trust fund will cover her education through graduate school. Christopher can't access a single penny of it. His daughter will have opportunities he can never control or steal from. The elderly gentleman who sparked this entire revelation. He's thriving beyond expectations. I've established a foundation in his name to support retired employees. The first recipient was Christopher's former executive assistant, whom he terminated for asking legitimate questions about accounting irregularities. Yesterday, I received a handwritten letter from Christopher's federal prison. He wrote that he finally understands what genuine worth means. I had it professionally framed and mounted in the boardroom, right beside our new company mission statement. Integrity is not negotiable. Some of you have asked whether I experience any regret about destroying my brother's life. I don't. He had years of decades to choose integrity over greed, compassion over cruelty. He made his choice consistently, every single time. I visited Meridian again last evening, sat at the exact same table, but this time I wasn't dining with family. I was there with our new board member, the former partner Christopher had discarded, and we discussed plans for the foundation's charitable initiatives. As we were leaving, I noticed someone who looked remarkably like Christopher's former golf partner clearing tables in the restaurant. Karma does take its time, but when it arrives, it brings comprehensive documentation. This will be my final update on this situation. Hamilton Industries is flourishing under ethical leadership. Sophia is thriving in her new environment and artistic pursuits. Christopher, well, orange apparently suits him better than those expensive Italian suits he used to prefer. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't just watching someone fall. It's ensuring they have a crystal clear view of everything they've lost as they hit the bottom. At 42, I thought I understood betrayal. Now I understand justice. And sometimes they're the exact same thing.